Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Center for Cybercrime Studies lecture. I'm Doug Selane, director of the center, and I'd like to special welcome to all our visitors from off campus who came to see the talk today. I'm from the era of many years ago when the internet was just a few scientists and engineers exchanging files and emails and things like that, and we all trusted each other. Just more or less we trusted each other. But we never realized, no one ever realized, that it would develop into this incredible global information infrastructure upon which it seems like all of our social and economic lives now depend. And of course, with that comes all the abuse and misuse that we would expect. And it opens up great possibilities, and you see them every day, but it also opens up great risks. So I'm so happy Professor Haberfeld from the Department of Law, Police Science, and Criminal Justice is here to tell us about her work in this area. And I'd like to bring up Professor Adina Schwartz, who's the Assistant Director of the Center and provides our legal expertise at the Center, to introduce our speaker today. Adina.
Okay, it's my very great honor today to be introducing Professor Maki Haberfeld, who I know as the wonderful chairperson of my department. And also Professor Haberfeld's one of the very few people I know of whom one can say both that she does work throughout the world and that she has an international reputation. Professor Haberfeld, in addition to speaking English, of course, is a fluent speaker of Hebrew, Polish, and Russian. I mean, to my knowledge, I just found out, I said, well, I know that you've given talks in Africa. I know of a talk in South Africa. I know you've talked in Asia because I know Maki works extensively with people in Turkey. And actually, I don't know whether technically it was in the European or the Asian part. I know that you've talked in Europe. How about Australia and South America? Well, she has talked in Australia, and she has an invitation from a police academy in Brazil to visit for 3 months. And so I have to say, this is someone whose work spans the globe, and I'm enormously pleased and proud to have her speaking to us today.
Thank you very much, Doug, Adina. Thank you for the introduction. What you're going to hear today in the next 30-35 minutes is part of a course that I developed shortly after 9/11. I am one of the co-creators and coordinators of a special program for NYPD officers that we started in the summer of 2001, just prior to 9/11, and it's a program that offers them courses in leadership in a multicultural city. And we started it in the summer of 2001. It was very successful. We decided to translate the course into the certificate into a semester offering. We started the first week of the fall semester of 2001. We have about 600 students. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and the following Friday, we offered the courses on Friday. Out of 600, only 3 came back. And of course, the following week, we only had 2, and the following week we had 4, and then the provost back then, Provost Basil Wilson, said to me, okay, we're going to close the program. And I said to him, let's wait another week. It's very important that we can offer our law enforcement officers here in the city this opportunity. And given what just happened, I already had an idea that we probably will have to expand it into counterterrorism course, not just leadership per se. And we managed to finish the semester with about 300 students. They came back gradually. And at the end of the semester of 2001, I was asked to develop counterterrorism policy course for law enforcement for this program. So today's lecture is actually the last lecture in this course that I teach for NYPD officers, or to NYPD officers for the last 12 years or so. I do offer this course during intersession to regular graduate students during the winter and summer times. So today what you're going to see is really, or you're going to hear, is a portion of a larger course that really takes into consideration our response to terrorism on an organizational level. This is what interests me. I am not a tech person as far as cyber is concerned, so don't ask me about firewalls and things of that nature because I have no clue. But I think I have some sort of a knowledge about how we respond to potential cyber mega-terrorist attacks, and this is the emphasis of this talk, is really about on mega-terrorist attacks, or how we do not respond properly. Some of what you're going to hear today is based on my work with the Turkish police, and some is based on the work I just started with the Dutch authorities. Why the Dutch law enforcement and the Turkish law enforcement? They both represent a very interesting angle as far as I'm concerned. The Turkish police is a national police force. The Dutch police, just in January of this year, reorganized itself out of 26 different forces to one national police force. And this is the future as far as I'm concerned. The future in targeting mega cyber terrorist attack is based on national response, national law enforcement response, and not what we have here. So as much as the Turkish police is not necessarily where they should be with their response, but they represent this infrastructure, so to speak, to implement the ideas that, conceptual ideas that I have at this point. Just a little bit of background regarding where I'm coming from and how this background helps me conceptualize the problem. So I have an undergraduate degree in archaeology, and then a master's degree in criminology and a PhD in criminal justice. So it's an interesting combination in the sense that I looked at what happened historically, what was not put in place historically that created demise of various institutions and beyond that. Then I look at various causation effects, why people commit crime the way they commit, and what are the chances of them stopping to commit these crimes, and the chances are not that high in my mind. And then I look at the organizations, because criminal justice is the organizational response, and I see what's lacking there. And so what you're going to hear is, again, some of the definitions that go back to 1970s. And the importance of this definition is that they highlight the fact that even though we know things for 40 years or 50 years, we still ignore them and look the other way, hoping for the best, when hoping for the best is not necessarily something that we should consider as our strategy. And then I will present you with the Dutch model that I actually just received last week. The Dutch has a new strategy. They came up with a strategy last year. This is strategy number 2, where they identified the partners, where they identified the steps to be taken that I think are magnificent, except for I still am trying to figure out how they're trying to implement the particular angle of public law enforcement. And then I will present to you part of the model that I'm developing in terms of how we should be going about this here or in other country for that matter. I would like to include you a little bit in what I'm saying, because I really do not believe necessarily in talking for 30 or 35 minutes to an audience. So if you want to stop me, if you want to ask me a question, please do. And if I ask you a question, help me out here a little bit. So this is what I'm going to start with, actually asking you, what all this have in common? What do they have in common? They were what? They were world leaders, and where are they today?
They're not world leaders.
They're not world leaders anymore, thank you, exactly. There was always some sort of a demise to the great powers, to the great empires, whether it was a natural disaster, like in the ancient Egypt, or whether it was lack of strategic and tactical orientation on the part of the Assyrians, who were a great empire. What they do have in common, that yes, they were as powerful as United States of America is today, beyond the power of United States of America today, yet unfortunately they perish. They perish to the point that whatever is left is of no significance other than to a few archaeologists like myself that like to look at the ruins and think, wow, what could have been done, what could have been achieved by them if they were prepared for this. And what they were not prepared for is basically summarized here. Never be surprised by a surprised man-made or natural disaster. Never be surprised means that you have to engage yourself, to engage your minds, to engage the way you think, to engage the way you act in a very proactive and broad manner, and not just respond to what happened in the past. One of the things that we think in countering terrorist activities is that we are always prepared for the last war. What does this mean? We are always preparing for the last attack. We do not look at the history and see these things happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago. They will happen again. Not only they will happen again, they will happen in a much more sophisticated way because of force multipliers. We have a lot of force multipliers today, so an attack that was perpetrated 10, 20, 30 years ago will be 10 times, 100 times more devastating today to us than it was when it was originally created. So, what is cyber terrorism? Before we go there, a couple of facts that I think will put us within the context of what I'm talking about. We are the most decentralized country on earth as far as law enforcement response is concerned. We have over 18,000 law enforcement agencies, 18,000 law enforcement responses, potentially, to cyber terrorism attack. And I'm saying potentially because, of course, a police department of 10 police officers or 20 police officers doesn't necessarily have the resources or the knowledge to be prepared for a cyber attack, yet 97% of the 18,000 police departments that we have, or law enforcement departments that we have in this country, are small departments, 50 officers and below. So if you have 50 officers and below, represent 97% of 18,000, you do the math. And out of this, we have 17 national intelligence agencies that supposedly collect information. Each one of them supposedly collects different type of information about potential attacks, including potential cyber attacks. Now, this is just to put us within the context of what I'm talking about. What the problem with our response is, one of the problems is that we don't necessarily look in any pragmatic way at what the threat is. And there is a very interesting theory that was developed over 10 years ago, the locus of error theory with regard to response to terrorism, that we have the tendency to be in self-denial. We have the tendency to be in self-deception. It's there, but it's really not there, and there are these organizations out there that are protecting us, and we are fine. Well, we are not fine. We are far from being fine. A little bit of glossary of the terms, and this is by I'm sorry for the typo, C, Don is with double D. And I'm going to point to the publications and the years of publications again, because in any other field, one would think, if we know something for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, let's act upon this, let's do something. We know these things, we're not acting upon them. So what he's doing is giving us some definitions here. And these definitions are very important in terms of different response by different law enforcement entities or private entities for that matter. And it will become important when I'm going to talk about the Dutch response, because they truly sort of bring together everybody related to these definitions. What the things have in common is that we're dealing with population that is both innocent at the same time or potentially innocent, and criminal in the sense of the intentions. You can damage systems, major systems, just playing on the computer and trying to show others how smart and sophisticated you are without having the intention. And at the same time, you can have all the malicious intents to create this apocalyptic event, yet from the perspective of the outcome is the same. From the perspective of the response and prevention, we're dealing with different populations. So it's very, very different from any other type of criminality that law enforcement agencies or private entities, for that matter, are asked to respond. If somebody is stealing something, they're stealing something. They're committing a criminal act, whether they're doing for fun or because this is something they derive their income from, it's immaterial, it's still criminal. But somebody playing on the computer, again, is not necessarily this intentional criminal. And this is something that has to drive us in terms of our response, or in terms of different responses that we're going to introduce later on. A little bit about definitions. And again, the definitions are important here because they're moving us from a macro level to a broader level, and then again from broader level to a macro level. And as much as we constantly are seeing, at least in the last few years, and especially from the angle of the Dutch police, but also the Europol, and I had the opportunity to listen to the head of Europol in June when he was evolving the new strategy of Europol. Europol is the European response to Interpol, which is the international police organization. Europol focuses on European countries and its response to crime. So the head of Europol was evolving the strategy that Europol just adopted this year. And it's interesting that all these strategies, whether it's the Dutch strategy or Europol or the Turkish police, they suddenly realizing that something needs to be done and something needs to be done right now. And a little bit of a digression, how I came to study of counterterrorism. Even before the year 2001, I taught at Jersey City State College, which is now New Jersey City University, and I developed a course titled High-Tech Crime. It was 1995, so many years before 9/11. And the reason I developed the course was that I picked up a newspaper, I think it was USA Today, and there was an interview on page 1 with a former CIA agent, and he said to the interviewer, and it was sort of the heading of this interview, "Give me 5 minutes and I will show you how to put this nation on its knees." And I read, and I looked at this, I said, wow, this is beyond weapons of mass destruction. I mean, even 5 minutes is not going, even using weapons of mass destruction, you're not going to put the nation on its knees. You're going to put certain areas in the nation. So, again, looking at this definition, we are looking at some sort of a macro response to terrorism, but not a very pragmatic one. And in law enforcement, one of the things that certainly is not going to work if we do not agree on what it is that we're trying to target, what it is that we're trying to prevent, what it is that we're trying to respond to. So unless we are going to agree on some sort of a definition, we're going to have a problem, because in order to have a proper response, you have to have allocation of resources. If you cannot allocate the resources, you're not going to respond properly. Allocation of resources will come as an outcome of some sort of a consensus. This is the threat. This is how we have to target it. This is how it's going. This is how much money we need or how many resources we need for this. So this is some sort of a scaffolding that we have to look at, and it has to start with the definition, because it's not enough to throw out, okay, we have a cyber threat, and the cyber threat can be this and that. And as you're going to look at the different types of definitions, you're going to see that, again, we are nowhere near the definitions we should be working with, and discard every other definition and leave it maybe for the academics to deal with. Anybody who teaches terrorism, I think, starts their first class with the same thing. Or there are many definitions of terrorism, and then you sort of focus on one that you're most comfortable with and go from there. From the law enforcement angle, we need exactly the same thing. We need to focus on one definition that is as short as possible, as practical as possible in terms of our response, and as economical as possible in the sense of allocation of resources. Because if somebody says, okay, I need billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in order to target it effectively, nobody will take you seriously. So, again, this is basically additional issue of defining the problems with terrorism. We have copious media attention, but there is no consensus even on methodology of how to go about defining the various threats. And this is very, very different from any other type of crime that law enforcement agencies have encountered for thousands of years. It's very, very amorphous. We don't know what we're fighting against. If we don't know what we're fighting against, we don't know what the solution is, and again, the lack of funding that I mentioned before. So there's no... I think the remote is missing, so I have to go back and forth here. Yes, it's okay, it's okay. So just looking at 9/11, for example, and thinking about 9/11 as something that has to do with cybercrime, one might take the standpoint saying, well, 9/11 was not a cyber attack, right? 9/11 was absolutely perpetrated by Biden's individuals who were using airplanes, who were using, various devices, but not computer crime. But yes, but computers were used to plan various aspects of 9/11. So we can go this way also if we want. We can sort of broaden our way, or the way we respond to terrorism, by including 9/11 as something that included the use of computers, and therefore it's one of the tactics used by 9/11 terrorists was cyber terrorism. And again, of course, we can argue about this, whether this is useful or not. Maybe it's not, but on the other hand, again, when I'm going to talk about the Dutch response, we're going to see that if you include, and this is something that I'm going to tell you right now already about the Dutch response includes 130 different entities responding together to cyber terrorism. 130 different entities, but in a coordinated way, and let's move away from comparison to 18,000 that we have here, because one might say, okay, we have 18,000. No, this is the bad response, the 18,000. 130 are very different entities, including ones that we cannot consider for a variety of reasons. This is the one that I like most, because it narrows the focus of the response to the most critical one. 9/11, with all due respect to 9/11, was a very tragic event in American history. From the perspective of law enforcement, it's not something, again, that should be looked upon in the same way as shutting down our infrastructure. Like Mumbai, when you have a number of targets attacked simultaneously, and our law enforcement here in New York is now trying to train its officers to respond to some sort of a mega attack like Mumbai, even though Mumbai was just a replica of attacks that took place in other countries many years ago. So give me a couple of ideas of what happens under this. Give me a couple of scenarios. What goes down? What can be closed by? What can be affected by a terrorist, cyber terrorist attack as far as infrastructure is concerned? Electrical system goes down. Think about just New York City, because it always close home. It's much more realistic to us. We're all in darkness. Now, I assume all of you remember Hurricane Sandy last year, and only a few streets were without electricity, and how we looked without electricity. This is one thing, and I'm using a template of a mega terror attack, because mega terror attack is the one that I really fear. Mega terror attack, at least in my definition conceptually, we're including attacking at least 5, and again, you'll ask me why 5? Well, because I arbitrarily decided that it would be 5, but of course it can be 3 or 7, but so we have one attack on electricity, another attack.
You could just get down the whole internet, so people weren't able to...
So communication goes down, electricity goes down. Give me 3 more. Stock exchange goes down. What else? Transportation goes down, including all the airplanes and everything that brings food to this city, okay? What else? Give me one more. Very critical. Yeah, of course, but you know, but beyond this, in relation to electricity, which I'm going to expand in a moment, how this will affect us. In addition to electricity, I'm sorry, water system. Okay, water system goes down, so we have no water, we have no food, we have no electricity, no transportation, no communication. How long are we going to survive in the city of 10 million people? 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. Any day they throw a different number, but we know that at least we have about 8 million. How long are we going to survive? Day, 2? More than that? Okay. Think about this if this happens simultaneously in New York City, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., you know, major centers in terms of deployment of any assistance to New York City. Now, how can you deploy assistance if there is no transportation? The only way is to do it, you know, with various trucks and on land. But this is another thing that can be attacked. In addition to this, of course, again, the scenario is apocalyptic scenario, but as I mentioned before, never be surprised by a surprise attack. So you have to stay within this framework. In addition to this, you have some sort of traditional terrorist attack that generates casualties like 9/11. Let's say 3,000 people right now, not necessarily dead, but require medical attention. Can we transport them to hospitals? How our hospitals work? What do they need? Supposedly they have generators. During Hurricane Sandy, New York Langone, which is one of the biggest providers in the city, what happened to their generator? Do you recall? Not working. So imagine this, and this is how we're supposed to, we're supposed to respond to this. Again, various agencies will tell you we are prepared. I am telling you we are not prepared. And again, prove me right or prove me wrong. Probably you're not going to prove me wrong because I talk to various people at various levels and they all tell me the same thing. There is a plan. What is this plan? People who need to know. Well, if we don't know here, then people who need to know don't know. And this is something that you're going to see soon on one of the reports. Going to skip a few slides probably. Okay, because of the time. You never know. I always try to prepare more, but then the time flies. So according to the State Department, and they a little bit behind with their information always on the major terrorist groups, at least half of the terrorist groups have their websites that they use for a variety of purposes. What it tells me is not necessarily whether or not I'm concerned with the fact that half of them have their website. What it tells me that they doing what? What is the thing that half of these terrorist groups are doing? What is the most important thing that they're doing that you see on this slide? They're staging incidents. They're staging incidents which basically gives them the ability in virtual world to create all these scenarios that we are talking about. And if they're doing this, they're thinking about this. And if they're thinking about this, they're capable, not all of them, but at least some of them are capable of doing something because it doesn't take that many skills, unfortunately, as we read here and there. A 15-year-old cracked the Pentagon, you know, intranet and things of that nature. And, people laugh, you laugh, I laugh, but it's pretty scary. And so it's happening, and okay. Okay, so this is something that was published 12 years ago. This was published 12 years ago, and basically by Rata in 2001, this is a guy from the military who says the US government must it must implement some sort of proactive education and public awareness strategy. At minimum, it has to emphasize the individual and organizational responsibility that have to do with what's happening in cyberspace and what can happen as a result. And what is the most important thing here? Look at bullet number 3. It should implement a plan to limit confusion and hype in the event of cyber terrorist attack. How many of you are aware of such plan or know what to do? And this is unfortunately, wherever I lecture about this, whether it's in front of a law enforcement agency or law enforcement agencies or students, I get the same response. I don't think I get the same response because it's for your eyes only, because this is not a James Bond movie. This is a reality that we live in. People who understand the threat, and in this case, somebody highly ranked in the military, understanding the threat 11, 12 years ago is saying, we must have a plan. The plan is something that each one of us has to be familiar with. Unfortunately, we don't. And again, the reason is because we have all these multiple agencies, each one convinced a certain degree that they have the plan or they have the response or they know what they're doing. Yet on an individual level, we don't know what to do. And we're sort of hoping that if it happens, no matter what type of magnitude, there will be somebody who will respond and guide us. Not necessarily happening. And again, as you're going to see in the Dutch strategy, the Dutch today are the only country that are actually implementing this concept introduced by Ratra in 2001, that they're going to involve people in responsibilities in terms of response to a cyber attack. Not just law enforcement agencies. Actually, law enforcement agencies will be peripheral to this response.
I was thinking that in addition to emphasizing the 18,000 police agencies, also don't you have to have it that there'll be intermediaries and there are corporations?
Sure, and this is what the Dutch are doing. But again, it has to be coordinated in such a way that it's not compartments like we have right now as far as law enforcement and private security are concerned. They're doing one thing, the others are doing another. They meet only in rhetorical space. When there is a need to present what is the answer, well, yes, we all cooperate together, like a regular JTTF task force, Joint Terrorist Task Force. When somebody asks them, you working together? Of course we're working together. But this working together doesn't necessarily happen.
In the U.S., most of the infrastructure that controls the internet, is backbone of the internet, is in the hands of private groups.
Sure.
There's no national structure.
Yeah.
Are nations that have a national controlled internet, for example, China, well, I don't know how it's done in
Hold on.
networks, but are they in a better position than we are to address these threats?
I think that, and this is something that directly came actually in an email exchange I had this morning with somebody from the National Security Center in Holland, and he said to me, it's not that we are in a better position than the United States, because I asked this question, similar questions, that we just take it much more seriously than you do. So if you take something seriously, then you see the outcome. If you don't take something seriously, and I would say that we do not take it seriously. We do not take it seriously on any level as far as counterterrorism response is concerned. And the prime example of this is, I don't know how many of you had seen the guy in New Jersey who shot himself in the mall a couple of weeks ago. Have you seen this? Have you seen the response of the law enforcement there? Like 17 different law enforcement agencies responded. It wasn't a terrorist attack, but it could have been very easily a terrorist attack because a week before there was a major terrorist attack in Kenya, in the mall. So this is the first thing that comes to mind. So the response of the local law enforcement here was that they literally blocked each other with the cars when they responded to the event there. If it was a real terrorist attack like the one in Kenya, there would be the biggest obstacle in terms of the first responders and tactical units coming there, because it's unbelievable just to look at the picture of this. Okay, so again, speeding up a little bit. It's important for me to introduce to you the Brian-Clark theory. It's from 1980s, so we're talking about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, people who had the vision, who understand what they're talking about, said, he says, we are highly technologically advanced superpower. Think how advanced we were 30 years ago in comparison today. And we are vulnerable. We are very vulnerable, and we are not prepared. And he basically, in the last bullet, says, American bureaucracy has failed to take proactive measures against technological terrorism. So if you are saying this 30 years ago, one would think, wow, but today we are prepared. But I would say, and I would posit to you, that Brian-Clark's theory is as relevant in 2013 as it was in 1980 when he came up with the definitions and with the ideas.